All right, I think we're ready to get started. There may be a few more attendees joining us as we go along, but I think we can get going.
All right, well, welcome everybody to today's press conference. My name is Shannon Franson, and I recently joined Climate Action Network Canada as the new Executive Director. I'm joining you today from unceded Indigenous lands traditionally known as Totsiake by the Gananhake Nation, and it's now known as Montreal, also known as Montreal. Today, we are very happy to share with you a powerful new report, Facing Fossil Fuels Future, Challenges and Opportunities for Workers in Canada's Energy and Labor Transitions. I'm joined today to present this report by my colleague Teika Newton, the Managing Director for Climate Action Network Canada, by Jamie Kirkpatrick, the Program Manager for Blue Green Canada, by Meg Gingrich, the President of Blue Green Canada and Assistant to the National Director of the United Steelworkers of Canada, and by Ken Bondy, the National Representative for Health, Safety and Environment at Unifor. And in the background today, we have our communications lead, Vicky Koo, helping with tech support. So thanks so much, Vicky. And I just want to reiterate, you heard it as you joined, but please note that we are recording today's webinar. So I now welcome Teika to tell us a little bit about the report.
Thanks so much, Shannon. Hello, everyone. I'm Teika Newton. I'm the Managing Director here at Climate Action Network Canada. I'm joining you from my home in Kenora, Ontario, in Treaty 3 territory. It's the traditional lands of the Lake of the Woods and Anishinaabe. This region is also home to Métis people and is now shared with deep gratitude by settlers and newcomers alike. When I give this land acknowledgement, I think about its meaning. It isn't a mere formality as part of my introduction. Acknowledging the land that supports me and my family, my community, and my loved ones is in many ways directly relevant to the context for the report that we're discussing today. This year, many of us have experienced firsthand impacts of climate change at a scale we've not previously seen. Whether it was the midsummer heat dome in the West or the raging wildfires that clouded skies in British Columbia across the prairies and into Northern Ontario, where I live, for months on end, or the floods that have hit communities in the East and the North, we're seeing and feeling for ourselves how serious climate change is and how it's affecting the places and people we love and rely on for our well-being. Alarm bells are ringing louder and louder on the need to limit planetary warming this century to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures if we want to maintain a livable planet. Around the world, and here in what is now called Canada, this means stopping the expansion of oil, gas, and coal extraction and scaling down production of these fossil fuels that are the largest source of harmful greenhouse gas emissions. A recent report in the preeminent science journal Nature calculated that Canada needs to keep 83% of fossil fuel reserves in the ground to keep that 1.5 degree temperature goal within reach. If Canada acts in line with what the science tells us is necessary, if we do keep that 83% of our fossil fuels in the ground, this will impact the future of the oil and gas industry, and in particular, the workforce whose livelihoods depend on this work today. What might those impacts look like? How many people will be affected and on what time scale? What other factors beyond climate and energy policies will impact jobs in this sector? What jobs are most likely to change as our efforts to shift our energy systems take hold? And how can we best prepare for the changes we know are coming? That's what this report, Facing Fossil Fuels Future, seeks to answer. In this report, we explore the outlook for workers who are currently employed by the oil and gas industry if we follow a 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned pathway. And we look at the new careers that need to be created in this decade to offer these workers opportunities in other sectors. As we document, automation, attrition through retirement, and the rapid decarbonization that a safe planet demands will all play a role in the changing job landscape. We calculate that of Canada's 167,000 jobs that are currently directly tied to oil, fossil gas, and coal, by the time we reach mid-century, 2050, when Canada is committed to achieving net zero emissions, about half of today's fossil energy workforce will be affected by the combination of increased automation and a managed phase out of oil, gas, and coal extraction in line with that 1.5 degree pathway. By 2030, approximately 56,000 alternative jobs in non-fossil energy fields will need to be created in order to ensure that today's energy workers continue to enjoy good, respectable work that provides well for their families and their communities. In the roughly 30 years until we hit that net zero emissions target, this current decade, the next 8 years, represents the largest effort that will be required for new job creation to ensure we have a workforce that's well aligned with the changing energy landscape. The good news is that nearly 3 in 4 oil and gas workers affected by the transition have direct skills to match to alternative clean industries or IT occupations elsewhere. For instance, about 40% of the transitioning workforce either have the direct skills to move into other industrial construction and maintenance, or they can do so with some minor training. This includes civil and electrical engineers, industrial mechanics, pipe fitters, and welders. Just over 10% of oil and gas workers, including heavy equipment operators, power engineers, power systems operators, and instrumentation technicians, have the relevant skills to be directly reemployed in wind and solar energy projects if the labor demand exists. Geothermal energy, decommissioning of oil and gas wells, moving into the field of industrial energy efficiencies, or even working in the chemicals industries are all very viable pathways to new decarbonized employment for today's fossil fuel workers. But in order to make this happen, federal and provincial governments must give employers and workers, including those in Indigenous communities, certainty on the likely future constraints on production by planning for a 1.5 degree aligned oil and gas output pathway that addresses Canada's fair share contribution to global climate action. When it comes to this planning exercise, it's crucial to remember that Indigenous peoples as rights holders have constitutionally protected rights that must be respected in the process of creating transition plans. While Indigenous engagement in transition planning is a topic that's beyond the scope of the current report, our friends at Indigenous Climate Action have done extensive work in this area, and I really strongly encourage everyone on this call, on this webinar, to take a look at their work around decolonizing climate policy and their thinking about just transition from an Indigenous perspective. Again, that's Indigenous Climate Action. You can find them online. We'll now talk a little bit about the 7 recommendations contained in our, or we'll talk a little bit about the 7 recommendations contained in our report in a little while, but I'd first like to turn to my colleague, Jamie from Blue Green, to give us a brief overview of the methods we used in our analysis. Jamie, over to you.
Great, thanks, Teika. And first, I also would like to begin by acknowledging that I am on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6 in the city of Saskatoon. And of course, the city of Saskatoon is the home of many nations, including the homeland of the Métis Nation, among others. And I'm still new to here, so I'm getting to know a bit more of the history. But thank you, Teika, for the introduction and for tying everything together. I'm just going to speak very briefly about the actual methodology used for the report, which you'll find on page 7 of the document, and you'll see that there's not a need for a deep explanation because this wasn't a very hard report to research. The data exists. Most all of the materials that are used come from Statistics Canada, and we've used the most conservative versions of these numbers available. So to ensure we had accuracy on age and date and things like that, we used 2016 data, which broke down the workforces by sector a lot more clearly. So we froze the age of the workers at that time just to be consistent with our data, meaning that we're producing even more conservative numbers as well. But essentially, all of the charts and graphs that were formed use the Statistics Canada data set as the main, and then we have used common and well-known international tools, including the Rystad multiplier tools, the Rystad YouTube database from the Stockholm Environment Institute. And whenever necessary, we've used Statistics Canada job multipliers as well. So keeping it all as local and as relevant as possible to this. And just the main point here is that the next 8 years, or the time between now and 2030, is the crucial part. All the numbers point to that. We can't start our efforts to decarbonize our sector in 2049. We need to start yesterday if we want to have this be a transition that brings those workers along, that provides them with plans in advance to make plans for themselves and their families, and we'll hear a few more specific examples of how we could and couldn't do that in the future with my colleagues Ken Bondy and Meg Gingrich speaking next. But yeah, there's the main takeaway on this is that we did not need to do anything with the numbers to make them this dire. This is the reality, and this is why we need to have a plan now to start to get this right and to get through this with people intact and our planet intact. So I'll pass it over now to Ken Bondy.
Yes, and thank you, Jamie. The reason for our participation in this on behalf of Unifor is that we certainly support this report. We see this report as a baseline document that has done the research and provides a pathway for us to get to that transition process. Unifor represents thousands of energy workers across this country. And we know that there must be a path put forward to protect those workers' jobs. For the record, we have said many times, Unifor, on behalf of our members, we do not deny that there is a climate change problem in this country, and we do not deny that there needs to be change. But what we demand is a process that is led by government to show us and finance those changes. Otherwise, we are going to find ourselves in a historic problem like we've seen in different changes of energy and environment issues in the past. And just a classic example that we point to is the debate that's going on right now with Michigan over Line 5. Now, here is an issue which, by the way, that line feeds the facilities where we have hundreds of Unifor members working in Sarnia, Ontario, that we knew years ago, or I should say the politicians knew years ago, that there was an attempt or a want to shut down Line 5. But nobody, no politician, no corporation took the initiative to find a solution for what would happen to the workers if that line was shut down. That's not acceptable to workers. That's not acceptable to unions, and it shouldn't be acceptable to politicians. If we are going to make change, those changes have to have a process that will ensure that workers can remain in safe, economically viable jobs as they move out and transition to less carbon intensive work. So we see this document as the initiation of putting forward a just transition plan that will benefit the workers of Canada. Thank you. Over to Meg.
Thanks, Ken and Teika and Jamie. I'm coming to you today from Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And so I just want to say, like Ken and Unifor, the Steelworkers very much acknowledge that climate change is real and that we need to act on it. And that many of our members, Steelworkers, will be directly affected by actions to combat climate change. And that doesn't mean we don't support it by any means, but I think, like, as this report highlights, it shows that we need a real plan to ensure that workers don't lose out as we transition to a lower carbon economy. And I can't emphasize that enough, is the need for real planning that actually and genuinely involve workers. Some of our members are in fossil fuel industries, but the majority of those who might be affected by action on climate change and reducing emissions are sort of in energy intensive industries like steelmaking or in resource extraction. And so in looking at this report, and we'll discuss some of the recommendations from it later, again, I can't emphasize enough, and this is something that we say over and over, and it feels like we're sort of constantly repeating the same thing. Workers need to be involved and need to be front and center, and it can't just be a politician touting the need to involve workers for the sake of political expediency. It needs to be genuine, and you need to come up with concrete policies in order to ensure that workers not only are involved, but they are not materially harmed throughout a just transition or through a transition process in order to make it truly just. So like Ken brought up the line 5 example, we have a sort of similar example with one of our steel mills. So we all know that steel making is very energy intensive. There's a lot of emissions, particularly from steel making made with blast furnaces. So in Algoma, in Sault Ste. Marie, there was an announcement a few months ago of a $420 million investment to move to an electric arc furnace that would reduce about 70% of the emissions from the steelmaking. Now, this seems like it could be a good news story, one where there's an investment into ensuring that the steel mill stays in the community. And it could, be something where we see both reduction in emissions, so it's good for the environment, and perhaps ensuring that there are long-term jobs in that community. But what happened with this, and this highlights the need for workers to really be involved from the get-go on planning for a transition. The workers, our union, was not consulted on this. So what happened is that the local union ended up being speaking out against this. Now, this didn't have to happen. If the workers had been consulted from the get-go on a transition plan, and they had been honest about, what would happen to some of the jobs, because the composition of the workforce would change, even if overall it ensures some sustainability of steelmaking in Sault Ste. Marie. If the workers, our union, had been consulted from the get-go, we would have been much more likely to have been supportive of this and been able to come up with a real plan to ensure that those workers who would actually be negatively affected, there were plans for them to ensure that either their skills were used elsewhere or retirement, pension bridging, things like that. Now, that may still happen, but it should have happened from the start. There were also no commitments to ensure jobs would stay in that community long-term. And this is one of the things that happens when workers aren't consulted. Something that you could get worker and union support for, you lose it by not including workers. So having concrete policies that ensure that workers know what's going to happen as we move towards a decarbonized economy is essential. And I think this report really lays that out, the importance of it for oil and gas workers, but it can be extended again to workers in energy intensive industries, extractive, and so on. Because if you don't do that, you get workers who are potentially fearful of action on climate change, and reasonably so. So I think that's one of our main takeaways from this, is that having a plan for oil and gas workers is important, and that does ultimately need to be extended to other sectors of the economy as well, in order to ensure that you have workers who end up well off at the end of this and don't just lose their jobs in communities. So with that, I will throw it back over to Teika, I think.
Thanks, Meg. Thanks so much, Ken and Meg. Those were really powerful real world examples that you've shared with us, some experiences from workers about the pitfalls of not working together to plan for this just and equitable workplace transition that we know is coming. We know that change is coming. In many ways, it's already here, and it's been unfolding for years. And in fact, the timing of our release of this report today coincides with the release of the 2021 World Energy Outlook from the International Energy Agency, which even further reinforces that a new energy economy is emerging. But we also know that we need to work together to weather these changes, and together we can make sure that no one is left behind. Climate Action Network Canada is a network of more than 130 civil society nonprofits, all sharing an interest in working for meaningful, just, and equitable climate action. In publishing the report today with our Labour friends at Blue Green Canada, the climate community is standing alongside workers and communities who are at the center of this energy and economic transition, as we called for our federal and provincial governments to plan for a 1.5-degree climate-safe future for all of us. Right now, this year and in the next few years, we have an incredible opportunity before us to thoughtfully plan for one of the greatest economic and social changes that many of us will experience in our lifetimes. We, the workers, the climate policy experts and activists, We're all ready to work hand in hand together to create a bright new future that works for everyone and leaves no one behind. The only way we can get there and avoid the pitfalls of past failure is by involving those who are most affected in helping to chart the course for their future and for our collective future. The phrase, "no decisions for us, without us," has echoed in my head over and over again in the course of working on this report and in discussing it with our labor allies. We need to plan for success. We need to work together and waste no time in rolling up our sleeves. So earlier I mentioned that we've articulated 7 top-line recommendations to guide the jobs transition that's upon us. I'll refer you to the report itself to read those recommendations in full, but I'll just provide a quick summary here so you get a sense for what they are. In addition to actually planning for the transition, we need to see governments recognizing the expertise of workers, consulting them, and engaging them in the development of just transition policy and legislation. We want to see a principle of inclusion applying as workers, governments, and civil society collaborate on creating the 56,000 new jobs in the next 5 years in compatible non-fossil fuel industries. Whenever public investment is involved, we want to see employers being required to meet conditions on job quality, including pay, access to training, job security, union access, and representation through mandatory joint committees. And we want to ensure that as we grow alternative jobs, for example, in decommissioning oil and gas wells or developing geothermal projects, we're designing projects that keep existing oil and gas workforces in work for existing employers without losses in pay, conditions, or collective bargaining. Finally, we want greater vigor in the oversight of how public monies, especially those used for fossil fuel reclamation and remediation, are spent. We need better enforcement of industry's compliance with paying into these funds, and the funds need to be directed to creating jobs for projects that actually remediate and restore ecosystems. And that's pretty much it. That's a summary of what we put in our report today. I'd welcome any questions that you might have.
So just for clarity, we're going to allow you all to talk. If you have a question, if you could please put a star in the chat, just a little asterisk, then Teika will call on you. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi there, it's Catherine Rukowski with Alberta Today. I'm wondering if maybe one of the union representatives could talk a bit about the pay aspect, because I know that's one of the difficulties in convincing oil and gas and other fossil fuel workers to transition is that pay. So how do you convince people that this is a future job for them in other industries?
Yeah, I can take that. So there's a lot of innovative ways that we can continue to carry on the pay. Everybody, I think, is pretty well knowing that energy workers get paid a fair wage above a lot of other industries. Mainly the reason for that, by the way, is because it's an incredibly dangerous sector to work in. We unfortunately see fatalities every year due to the dangers that exist working in those oil fields and the manufacture of hazardous chemicals and such. But I mean, and the report also speaks to this as well, is that there's a couple of innovative ways that we can do that. As far as carrying on those wages. So for years and years, there was a very strong decommissioning fund for these facilities and for the lands that they were working on. And the federal governments over the years have allowed that to erode, but those monies should be used to carry on the same pay and the same benefits that those workers are working in today. Another suggestion that is in the report is that a lot of those workers have the skills to transfer over to things like geothermal expansion of buildings, homes, etc. There's no reason, in my opinion, that the government, if they're truly going to put efforts into a just transition for workers, that if there was a shortfall on those wages, the federal government should be able to fund those, shore those shortfalls up. And again, the other thing that we know is there's large subsidies that are paid to those oil and gas companies. And we have always said, how about sharing some of that money with the workers rather than the corporations? Finally, because we know that when there is a drop in profits for those corporations, it is the workers that always pay the price. They're the ones that are laid off. Not that there's adjustments in the business plan for those corporations. And what we're really calling for here is it's time to put the worker first and ensure that they're taken care of, or we're going to have difficulty, certainly, in convincing all of our members, all of the workers across Canada, that they need to get on board with this transition.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that. I mean, that is definitely one of the things that comes up first from our members if we talk about this. It's just, you know, they see a transition to what a minimum wage job somewhere that doesn't use their skills. And so that is exactly why you need planning. You need retraining that's actually tied to jobs. And you do need more, you know, coherence in terms of policy when you look at trade policy and things like that, that we're not just signing trade agreements that, you know, where we're offshoring jobs or whatever, importing goods that are made in poor environmental and labor conditions, instead of creating markets and jobs here in Canada where workers could put those skills to use and that they're well-paid unionized jobs. So there's a lot we can do at the policy level and at the local level, at the plant level, with the unions all the way to international trade policy.
I see that, Nicholas, you've typed a question into the Q&A. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question yourself? Oh, okay. I'll just read it out for you. So Nicholas says, I'm from the US, so not exactly sure how it works in Canada, but the fossil fuel sector here has higher pay and higher unionization rates, even though the jobs are no longer growing when compared to fast-growing renewable energy industry. Are new renewable energy jobs unionized? How do we ensure that new renewable energy jobs are high quality, high pay, and unionized?
So again, I mean, I can say that in some of our provinces, unfortunately, we have premiers, we have politicians that have sided fully with corporations that put profits before people, and have done such things as making unionization of workplaces more difficult through a legal process. Corporations themselves have taken it upon themselves to try to discourage that unionization. And so I'll say it again, that is mostly always driven by a greed of more profit. I typically use this example all the time, but that some people find ridiculous, but when you really think of it, it's not. So we have fast food outlets across North America that show profits in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars every year, yet they continue to pay workers minimum wage. There's no reason why you can't have dedicated employees making a living wage, providing quality service, and making more than the minimum wage mandated by the government. Corporations have to share those profits back with workers, and that's what trade unionism is all about. So the other thing that has to be stepped up from corporations and politicians is not to be afraid of trade unions, but to share fairly with us, give workers a voice, and let us get through this transition together.
Thanks, Ken. Catherine, I noticed you trying to unmute earlier. I'm just wondering if if the answers that you were looking for are there, or if you had a further question.
I got all my answers, so thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Okay. I am not seeing any other questions here. I don't think I'm missing any in the Q&A. No. So I'll give it one last go around. Any further questions that anyone might have, and then maybe we'll just have a few closing comments, and I think we can wrap up. Okay, Jamie, I'll turn over to you maybe to say a few closing comments.
Sure. Great. Well, yeah, and I think thanks for the questions specifically related to workers and how they get through this. I think that is the predominant next question to answer. And I think it starts with some honesty from government and employers. We've all agreed that we want a future, and globally we've agreed that we're going to work together to try and keep our emissions to 1.5 degrees above 99 level, excuse me. So we have to actually do something to make that happen. Talking about it, and you can quote this, is just making more hot air and making the problem worse. What we have to actually do is get together and have a real talk conversation with people. If we can actually show that there's a willingness in Canada to pull together, to plan together, and to push through this and to succeed, we have all the tools we need to do it. It's just going to take a little bit of leadership and willingness to have hard conversations. We hope that this report starts some of those conversations, and we hope that we're around to help have more of them, because we know that we need to get through this. We know that we want to have a viable economy and a healthy environment, and we know that it's possible to do both. Anyone else have anything to wrap up with?
Thanks so much, Jamie. So you can find the report, Facing Fossil Fuels Future. It's on our website, climateactionnetwork.ca, and I encourage you to go check it out and contact us if you have further questions. Thanks so much, everyone.